The gavel struck and the sound echoed through the courtroom like a death knell, sealing the words I could barely comprehend. I was stripped of custody of my 6-year-old daughter, Lily, and the home I had built my life around a $3.8 million estate in Pasadena that now legally belonged to the man who had once sworn to love me. My husband, Nathan, stood tall and composed his expensive suit, pressed sharp as a blade, and with calculated ease, he reached down to take Lily's trembling hand, leading her away from me as though I were a stranger. My mother-in-law, Patricia, smiled with the satisfaction of a predator. My sister-in-law, Veronica, leaned in close enough for me to feel her perfume and whispered coldly, "You never belonged here." My knees weakened, my chest tightened, and I tasted the bitter tang of betrayal on my tongue. In that moment, I believed I had lost everything, yet I did not know that the basement of my late mother's house in Ohio still waited to change everything. My name is Clara Mitchell, though I was born Clara Carter in Columbus, Ohio, 32 years ago. If you looked at me on the surface sitting in that courtroom in Los Angeles, you might think I had always belonged to the world of polished shoes and marble floors, but the truth is very different. I grew up in a modest neighborhood where the houses were close together, the lawns small, and the air always smelled faintly of chalk dust from the papers my mother carried home from school. My father died in what I was told was a car accident when I was 12 years old. I can still remember the knock on the door, the police officer's stiff hat in his hands, the way my mother Evelyn clutched the doorframe as if it were the only thing holding her upright. From that moment, she carried both roles, mother and father, on her narrow shoulders. Evelyn Carter was a high school English teacher, a woman of endless patience and quiet strength. She never remarried, never even entertained the idea, and instead poured everything she had into raising me. She would grade papers at the kitchen table late into the night, while I finished my homework beside her, and whenever I grew frustrated, she would put down her red pen, look me in the eyes, and say, "The truth will save you, Clara, even when it hurts." Those words were her creed, etched into me long before I understood their weight. When I turned 18, I left Ohio with a scholarship in hand and a hunger to prove myself. College was a new world where no one knew the shy girl whose father had died and whose mother worked herself to exhaustion. I studied finance because numbers made sense when people did not, and I graduated determined to build a life beyond the quiet grief of my childhood. I moved to Los Angeles, taking an entry-level job at a small financial firm where my days were long and my salary unimpressive, but the independence felt like a victory. I rented a cramped studio apartment, counted every dollar, and told myself that success was just a matter of time. It was at a networking event in a downtown hotel ballroom filled with laughter and ambition that I met Nathan Mitchell. He was magnetic in a way I had never encountered before. The kind of man who made every other voice in the room fade. He was 5 years older, polished, confident, carrying the quiet arrogance of someone who had always known privilege. He asked me about my goals, listened intently, and then smiled in a way that made me believe I was being seen for the first time. I fell quickly, recklessly. Within months, we were inseparable, and within a year, I was standing in a white gown saying vows I believed were sacred. The Mitchells were everything my family had never been wealthy, connected old Pasadena stock. Their estate glittered with chandeliers, their dinner parties attracted lawyers, bankers, and politicians. At first, I thought I had finally found the family I had always yearned for, the kind of safety and belonging that had died with my father. But even on my wedding day, I caught the cool, assessing eyes of Patricia, Nathan's mother, and felt the sting of her unspoken judgment. "You are not one of us." Still, I ignored it. When Lily was born, tiny and perfect with my eyes and Nathan's smile, I believed any distance between me and the Mitchells would dissolve. I gave up climbing the financial ladder, choosing instead to pour myself into motherhood. I thought love and sacrifice would be enough. I thought I had finally built the home my mother had wanted for me. But as I look back now, I see that those early cracks in the facade were already forming, that the life I thought I had secured was nothing but a carefully laid trap waiting to snap shut the moment I was most vulnerable. In the beginning, life with Nathan felt like a dream, carefully stitched together from every hope I had carried since childhood. Our wedding had been the kind of spectacle that made the society pages a glittering affair beneath chandeliers with champagne flutes that never emptied. I told myself the disapproving glances from Patricia and the forced smiles from Veronica didn't matter, that once they saw how devoted I was to Nathan and the family, they would soften. When Lily was born a year later, my world seemed to crystallize into something perfect. She was small and pink with my dark hair and Nathan's dimpled smile, and the moment I held her, I felt as though every sacrifice I had ever made had led to that instant. I had been working long hours at the firm, but when Lily arrived, I stepped away without hesitation. Nathan assured me it was the right decision, that his income was more than enough, and I told myself my worth wasn't tied to my paycheck. I threw myself into motherhood, measuring my days not in balance sheets, but in bottles and lullabies. The house in Pasadena felt like a castle compared to my childhood home. The marble floors gleamed, the garden bloomed year-round, and Lily had a nursery painted in soft yellows where sunlight streamed through tall windows each morning. I would rock her in the old wooden chair my mother had once used for me, the only piece of Evelyn's furniture I insisted on bringing, and whisper stories about her grandmother. I thought I was building something strong, unbreakable. Nathan seemed proud, at least in the beginning. He would arrive home from his office downtown, scoop Lily into his arms, and laugh as she cooed against his shoulder. We hosted parties, the kind where men in suits gathered in the library while women sipped wine in the sunroom, and though I often felt like a guest in my own home, I believed I was proving myself. Every table I set perfectly, every polite smile I maintained under Patricia's scrutiny felt like another step toward belonging. But Patricia's disapproval never softened. She would watch me cradle Lily and say, "Nathan was born for greatness. He needs a wife who can stand beside him, not one who hides in the nursery." Veronica, younger and single, treated me with a kind of amused contempt, as if my devotion to Lily made me less of a woman. I brushed their words aside, convincing myself that love could bridge the gap. For a while, I clung to the small moments that made it all feel worthwhile: Nathan kissing Lily's forehead before bed, the sound of her laughter echoing through the halls, the pride I felt when neighbors admired our family portrait above the fireplace. I told myself the whispers, the judgment, the tiny cuts of disdain didn't matter. After all, I had a husband, a daughter, a home beyond anything my mother could have imagined. Surely that was enough. Looking back now, I realize those were the brightest days of my marriage, and they passed faster than I understood. I was too busy clutching at the fragile dream of happiness to see the storm gathering around me, too blind with gratitude to notice that every piece of my life rested on the shaky foundation of a family that never wanted me. The cracks were already forming, and soon they would split wide open. The cracks began quietly, almost imperceptibly, the way a hairline fracture in glass waits until the right pressure shatters it. At first, it was Nathan's late nights. He used to come home by 7, greeting Lily with playful laughter, but soon he started calling to say he was tied up at the office. Dinners grew cold on the table, and I found myself eating alone while Lily slept. When I asked if something was wrong, his answers were clipped. "Just work. Don't worry." But the distance between us stretched wider with each passing week. Then came the whispers from Patricia, no longer cloaked in politeness but sharpened to cut. At family dinners, she would lean across the table, her pearls catching the candlelight, and remark, "Clara, you should really think about getting back to work. Nathan needs a partner, not a nanny." My cheeks burned, but Nathan never defended me. He would sip his wine, eyes fixed anywhere but mine, and the silence stung worse than her words. Veronica, emboldened by her mother's contempt, found her own ways to twist the knife. She would show up unannounced, traipsing through the Pasadena house in designer heels, and toss comments like confetti. "Clara, you look exhausted. Lily must be a handful. Some women just aren't cut out for motherhood." Her smirk lingered even after she left, filling the rooms with a residue of malice. I told myself it didn't matter, that as long as Lily was safe in my arms, I could endure their disdain. But even Lily began to notice Nathan's absence. One night she asked, "Why doesn't Daddy tuck me in anymore?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and lied. "Daddy's busy making sure we're safe, sweetheart." Inside, I was unraveling. There were nights I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every look, wondering if maybe they were right, if maybe I wasn't enough. When I tried to talk to Nathan, his patience snapped. "Clara, stop being so dramatic. My mother is just trying to help. Veronica is family. You should be grateful." Grateful. the word lodged in my chest like a stone. I was supposed to be grateful for their cruelty, grateful for being made small in the very house I had built my life around. The distance turned into walls. Nathan began locking his phone, carrying it with him even to the shower. Business trips appeared on the calendar without warning, vague explanations offered with a dismissive wave. When I reached for his hand in bed, he turned away. The warmth that had once wrapped around me like a promise was gone, replaced by a cold silence that grew heavier each day. I clung to Lily as though she were a lifeline, kissing her soft hair, whispering stories about my mother Evelyn, reminding myself that love still existed in her laughter. But beneath the sound of her giggles, I felt the ground shifting. I was surrounded by a family that despised me, a husband who no longer looked at me with love, and whispers that told me my place was not secure. Looking back, I can see how inevitable the collapse was, how each late night, each cruel remark, each dismissive glance was a warning. At the time, I convinced myself it was just a phase, that Nathan would come back to me, that Patricia and Veronica would tire of their cruelty. I didn't yet understand that they weren't just chipping away at me. They were setting the stage for my destruction. The day the papers arrived, I was folding Lily's laundry, the soft cotton of her pajamas still warm from the dryer. A knock rattled the front door sharper than any visitor would dare. When I opened it, a man in a dark suit handed me an envelope. His expression detached, as though he had delivered 1,000 heartbreaks before mine. Divorce petition, custody hearing. My hands trembled as I read the words, the letters swimming across the page, but what froze me was the accusation spelled out in bold black ink. Nathan had alleged that I was emotionally unstable, prone to outbursts and fits of depression. He claimed I had neglected Lily, leaving her unattended for hours at a time. There were attachments, exhibits, things that looked official. A letter from a doctor I had never seen suggesting I was unfit to manage my own mental health. Statements from neighbors I barely knew, insisting they had seen Lily wandering unsupervised in the yard. Credit card statements showing extravagant purchases. I had never made lists of luxury items supposedly bought under my name. My stomach twisted. I was looking at a carefully orchestrated portrait of a woman I didn't recognize. And it was me. When Nathan came home that night, I held the papers in my shaking hands and demanded an explanation. He didn't shout, didn't rage. He only looked at me with a cold detachment I had never seen before and said, "It's for the best, Clara. You're not well. Lily deserves stability." My voice cracked as I told him it was all lies, begged him to reconsider, but his eyes slid away as though I were already invisible. At the hearing, I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer, a man I could barely afford, recommended by a friend from the firm I had long since left. The Mitchells were already there, polished and poised. Nathan sat with his high-priced attorney, radiating control. Patricia sat behind him, pearls gleaming her back straight with pride. Veronica lounged at her side, smirk curling at the edges of her lips. I wanted to scream at the judge to tell him everything was fabricated, but each piece of paper the opposing counsel produced was like another stone weighing me down. A doctor's note, a neighbor's statement, financial records. Lies stacked on lies, yet presented with the sheen of truth. When Patricia was called to testify, she clasped her hands as though in prayer and spoke in the voice of a martyr. "I love Clara, but she has struggled since my son married her. I have seen her neglect Lily's meals, forget important appointments. She is a good woman, but she is not stable." Her words cut deeper than any blade. I wanted to leap from my chair to shout that she was lying, but my lawyer squeezed my arm, warning me to stay calm. Every tear that fell down my cheek felt like confirmation of their story. When the judge finally spoke, his words fell heavy and irreversible. "Custody of Lily will be granted to the father. The residence in Pasadena will be awarded to Mr. Mitchell." I sat frozen, the air sucked from my lungs. Nathan did not look at me. He simply stood, buttoned his jacket, and extended his hand to Lily. My daughter hesitated, her wide eyes flicking to me, searching for reassurance. I forced a smile through the flood of tears, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. Go with Daddy." My voice broke on the last word. As they left, Veronica leaned close, her perfume sickly sweet, and whispered, "You never stood a chance." Patricia's smile lingered as though she had won a prize. I was left alone at the table, stripped not just of my child and my home, but of the very identity I had built around being a mother and a wife. Everything I had sacrificed, every dream I had nurtured, had been twisted into a weapon used against me. I thought of my mother's words about truth, and for the first time I wondered if truth was powerless in the face of such carefully constructed lies. I left the courthouse with nothing but a cardboard box of documents and the hollow echo of Lily's voice still clinging to my ears. The Pasadena house once filled with her laughter was no longer mine. I packed what little the court allowed me to keep into the trunk of a borrowed sedan and drove to a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The walls were thin, the carpet stained, and the smell of stale smoke lingered in the hallways. Each night I sat on the edge of the mattress that sagged in the middle, staring at the empty spot where Lily should have been. Her toys were gone, her clothes folded neatly into drawers I would never open again. I pressed her photograph against my chest until it crumpled, praying that somehow she could feel me holding her. Veronica's messages arrived like daggers, reminders of my humiliation. One evening, as the rain hammered the windows, my phone buzzed and I read the words, "Enjoy your new life," in the gutter. I imagined her smirk as she typed, reveling in my descent. My hands shook, but I didn't reply. What could I say to people who had stolen everything from me? Days blurred into nights. I stopped eating the refrigerator bare, except for a carton of milk that soured before I opened it. My body moved through motions, wake stare, collapse, but my mind spun in circles of grief. I would walk past playgrounds and see little girls with pigtails, and my knees would buckle as though struck. Each time I saw a mother hold her child, a piece of me withered. Weeks passed and I realized I had become a ghost haunting my own life. One night I pulled a shoebox from the closet and sifted through old photographs I had carried from Ohio. There was one of my mother Evelyn standing in front of our small brick house with her arm wrapped around me. I was 10 years old, still believing the world was safe. The house looked worn even then, but in my memory it was the only place that had ever truly felt like home. As I traced my mother's smile with my fingertip, something inside me broke. I thought, if I cannot live as Lily's mother, if everything I have been has been erased, what is left? The answer came heavy and final. Nothing. That night, I made a decision that felt like both surrender and release. I would drive back to Ohio. I would go to the house my mother had left behind, and in the quiet of those familiar walls, I would end this. I bought a bottle of sleeping pills from a pharmacy where the clerk didn't bother to look at me. I packed a single suitcase, filling it with the same clothes I had worn on repeat, and slid the photo of my mother and me into the side pocket. As I placed the pills into my bag, my hands stopped trembling. There was a grim steadiness in knowing the pain would soon be over. I told myself it was better this way, that Lily would be safe with Nathan's money and his mother's watchful eye. I whispered to the empty room, "I love you, baby girl. Forgive me." Then at dawn, I started the car. The freeway stretched endless 2,000 miles of asphalt between Los Angeles and Ohio. I drove through deserts and plains, rainstorms that beat against the windshield like fists, and nights where the silence pressed against my skull. At times, I wondered if the car was carrying me forward or simply pulling me deeper into the void. Yet I kept going mile after mile until at last the skyline of Columbus appeared gray and familiar. The house stood waiting, dust coating the windows, the garden wild with weeds. I sat in the driveway gripping the steering wheel and whispered to my mother, "I came home, Mama. This is where it ends." The house on Maple Street looked smaller than I remembered, its white siding dulled to gray, the black shutters hanging crooked as though even they had given up. Weeds choked the garden where my mother once planted marigolds, and the porch sagged under the weight of years. I parked at the curb and sat with the engine running, the hum filling the silence that had settled over me since leaving Los Angeles. I had pictured this moment for 2,000 miles, and now that it was here, my hands would not unclench from the steering wheel. This was where my life had begun, and this would be where it ended. Eventually, I forced myself out of the car. The air smelled of wet earth and something faintly metallic like old pennies. The front door stuck, but with a push it gave way and I stepped into a time capsule. Dust motes floated in the dim light, filtering through drawn curtains. Sheets draped over furniture like ghosts standing sentinel. My mother's reading glasses still rested on the end table, a film of dust softening their edges. Her house had not changed since the funeral 3 years ago. It was as if she had stepped out for a moment and never returned. I set my bag on the couch and walked slowly down the hallway to my old bedroom. The walls were still painted the pale blue she had chosen for me at 13, the color faded now to the hue of a long-forgotten sky. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the bottle of pills from my bag. They rattled like distant thunder. This was where my mother had once sat with me during storms, telling me stories about constellations to calm my fears. I thought about Lily, about how her hair smelled after a bath, about the way she reached for me, even in sleep. Tears blurred my vision. I whispered to the empty room, "I'm so sorry, baby girl. Forgive me." My fingers fumbled at the cap. Before I could open it, my gaze fell on the small jewelry box atop the dresser. It was carved from dark wood, the same one my mother had used to store her keepsake's wedding ring birth certificate. Small treasures from a life she rarely spoke about. On impulse, maybe to delay the inevitable, I reached for it. The lid creaked open to reveal a tangle of old earrings, a pressed four-leaf clover, and at the bottom a heavy brass key with a strip of masking tape labeled simply "Basement." I frowned. I had never known the basement to be locked. I held the key in my palm, its weight strange and solid. A flicker of curiosity stirred faint but insistent, like a thread, pulling me back from the edge. Why would my mother lock the basement? What had she wanted to keep hidden down there? For a moment, the pills felt foreign in my other hand, ridiculous, even as though some invisible hand had reached across time to interrupt me. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. "The truth will save you, Clara, even when it hurts." I rose on shaky legs, the bottle of pills still in my pocket, but the key clutched tight in my fist. The door to the basement was at the end of the kitchen behind a curtain of cobwebs. The lock resisted at first, but then clicked open with a sound that seemed to split the silence of the house. I hesitated on the threshold, the darkness below cool and damp against my face. I told myself I would just satisfy the curiosity before I ended things. One last discovery before the end. I reached for the light switch and descended the stairs, not knowing that each step was carrying me away from despair and toward the truth that would change everything. The light flickered weakly, buzzing like an insect as it revealed the basement I had not stepped into since childhood. The air was damp and smelled of earth heavy with neglect. Boxes lined the walls, their cardboard sagging labels faded. Old furniture huddled beneath dusty tarps, and in the far corner sat a trunk I vaguely remembered my mother warning me never to touch. But what drew my eyes immediately was the heavy iron safe bolted into the foundation, its surface mottled with rust, but still solid, deliberate, purposeful. My breath caught in my throat. Why had my mother locked this place, left me a key? Kneeling before the safe, I found another key taped beneath the jewelry box lid, as if she had planned every step for me. My hands shook as I fitted it into the lock. With a reluctant groan, the door swung open. Inside lay stacks of bills wrapped in bands marked by banks I had never heard of, nearly $750,000 by the rough count of my panicked eyes. My mouth went dry. Money hidden here for years, untouched, unknown. Beneath the cash was a leather folder, thick with documents, and resting atop it, a photograph. My mother Evelyn stood beside a tall man in military uniform, his arm protectively around her shoulders. I had never seen this man before. On the back of the photo in my mother's slanted handwriting was a single word: truth. My fingers trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were files clippings and a letter sealed in an envelope with my name written in that same familiar hand. I pressed it against my chest, the paper trembling with the beat of my heart before tearing it open. "Clara, if you are reading this, I am gone. And if I am gone, the time has come for you to know. Your father did not die in an accident. He was murdered." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I forced myself onward. Your father uncovered a network of corruption tied to the Mitchell family. He was preparing to testify when his car was forced off the road. They made it look like an accident, but I knew the truth. I stayed silent to protect you. I raised you alone because I feared if they knew what I carried, they would come for you too. That is why I hid the money, why I locked the basement. One day you would need the means to fight and the courage to know the truth. I am sorry for the lies, Clara, but the truth is yours now. Fight for it. Fight for him. Fight for yourself. The letter fell from my hands. My father murdered. My mother forced to live in silence. The Mitchells, the same family that had just stolen my daughter, had been stealing from me long before I even understood what was mine. Rage and grief collided in my chest, but beneath it all, something else rose, a steadiness, a resolve I had thought long dead. I had come here to die. Yet the house, the basement, my mother's words had pulled me back from the edge. Instead of surrender, I felt the first spark of defiance ignite. The pills were still in my pocket, but now they felt ridiculous, useless against the storm rising inside me. I wiped my tears and stared at the photograph again. The Mitchell family had built their empire on lies, on blood, on betrayal. And now they had taken Lily using the same tricks of manipulation and deceit that had killed my father. I whispered into the stillness, "I won't let you win." My voice was hoarse but strong. For the first time in months, I felt alive. My mother had given me a map, a weapon, and a reason to fight. The basement had not been the end I intended. It was the beginning of something I had never thought possible: war. I spread the documents across the dusty basement floor, the papers whispering as I turned page after page. Bank statements, shell companies, offshore accounts, names I recognized from Nathan's business dinners, men who had shaken my hand with polished smiles, while their eyes slid past me as though I were invisible. But the patterns were undeniable, millions funneled through fake corporations, signed and notarized by people connected to the Mitchell family. My breath quickened as realization struck. Nathan's family had not simply disliked me, they had hunted me from the beginning. My mother's letter had said my father uncovered their corruption. Now, staring at the dates and signatures, I saw the timeline for what it was. My father had died because he was a threat. Years later, when I moved to Los Angeles, when I met Nathan at that glittering networking event, it had not been fate or romance. It had been strategy. They had placed him in my path. Nathan had pursued me not out of love, but out of calculation, ensuring that the loose thread of my father's unfinished work would remain under Mitchell control. Our marriage was not the storybook romance I had clung to. It was the perfect trap, a union that gave them access to me, to my silence, to Lily. Rage burned hot and blinding. Every kiss, every promise, every tender word Nathan had ever spoken, replayed in my head, now twisted into poison. Patricia's constant scrutiny, Veronica's cruel jokes, none of it had been casual malice. It had all been part of the plan to break me down, to isolate me, to make me doubt myself. Even the custody battle had been staged, their evidence carefully forged, not just to steal my daughter, but to permanently erase me as an obstacle. My father's blood was on their hands. My daughter's tears were their triumph, and I had almost given them the final victory by surrendering my own life. I pressed my palms against the concrete floor, grounding myself in the cold reality of the moment. They thought they had won. They thought I was weak, but my mother had believed otherwise, or she would not have left me the money, the documents, the truth. She had trusted that when the time came, I would fight. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked under my footsteps as I carried the folder into the kitchen. I set it on the table where my mother had once graded papers late into the night. I whispered aloud as though she could hear me still. "You knew they would come for me. You knew this would be my war." My reflection stared back from the window, gaunt, weary, but no longer broken. A mother stripped of everything but not defeated. My mind raced ahead, already planning. These documents were more than proof. They were leverage. If the Mitchells thought they could silence me with courtrooms and lies, they had underestimated how far I was willing to go. For Lily, for my father, for myself, I would tear down everything they had built on blood and deceit. In that quiet kitchen, I made a vow. I would not be their victim. I would be their reckoning. The next morning, I drove into Columbus with the folder of evidence strapped into the passenger seat beside me, like a living thing, my pulse quickening each time I glanced at it. I knew I could not do this alone. I needed someone who understood the law, someone who could wield it as sharply as Patricia had once used it against me. That thought brought me to the doorstep of Angela Roberts, a woman whose name I had whispered like a prayer during my custody battle. wishing she had been the one at my side instead of the timid attorney I could barely afford. Angela was a former federal prosecutor now working as a defense lawyer known for cases that tore apart corrupt corporations brick by brick. I walked into her office clutching the folder, my voice trembling as I said, "I need help. They stole my daughter, they killed my father, and I can prove it." For a long moment, Angela studied me in silence, her sharp eyes scanning my gaunt face, the determination behind my desperation. Then she gestured for me to sit. "Show me." I spread the documents across her desk the same way I had on the basement floor, my fingers darting across signatures, dates, names. Angela leaned forward, her brow furrowed, lips pressed into a thin line as she read. Page after page, her expression shifted from skepticism to grim recognition. When she finally looked up, her voice was low and steady. "Clara, this is not just family drama. This is racketeering. Fraud. Possibly conspiracy to commit murder. And if even half of this checks out, the Mitchells are finished." A heat spread through me, part fear, part vindication. "Will you help me?" I whispered. Angela nodded. "We'll need to be careful. The FBI will want this, but if we go too fast, they'll spook. If we go too slow, they'll bury you before you even testify. We build a wall of evidence so high they cannot climb over it." For the first time since losing Lily, hope cracked through the despair like sunlight through storm clouds. Over the next weeks, I lived inside Angela's office, sorting, scanning, piecing together the puzzle. She reached out to contacts still within the Bureau, men and women who owed her favors, who were willing to look at what we had without tipping off the Mitchells. Late nights blurred into early mornings as we built timelines, traced accounts, connected Nathan's business ventures to Veronica's shell companies, to Patricia's quiet signatures on property deals. Each thread wove into a tapestry of corruption so vast it stunned even me. Yet the more we uncovered, the more dangerous it felt. Strange cars lingered near my mother's house. My phone rang with silent calls in the middle of the night. Once a brick shattered the front window with a single word scrawled across it in black marker. "Stop." Angela insisted we move the files to a secure location. "This isn't intimidation," she said grimly. "This is a warning. They know you're fighting back." But instead of breaking me, it steeled my resolve. I had come here ready to die. Now I was ready to live for the battle. The day Angela handed the compiled dossier to her bureau contact, I felt the ground shift beneath me. We were no longer hiding. We were going on the offensive. The Mitchells had used the law as their weapon. Now it was mine. The courthouse smelled the same as it had months earlier, polished wood, stale air, faint cologne lingering in the halls, but this time I did not enter as a victim. Angela walked beside me, her stride confident, the dossier of evidence tucked beneath her arm like a blade she was ready to unsheathe. My stomach churned as we stepped into the courtroom. Yet beneath the nerves was steel. Nathan sat at the defendant's table in a tailored navy suit, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting between me and Angela with a flicker of unease he could not quite hide. Patricia's lips were pressed thin. Veronica's manicured nails drummed the table as though daring the judge to hurry up and dismiss us. They expected the same outcome as before: Clara humiliated, silenced, erased. But this time, the balance had shifted. The judge called the session to order and Angela rose. "Your Honor, new evidence has come to light that changes the foundation of this case. Evidence not of my client's unfitness as a mother, but of the Mitchell family's criminal enterprise." Gasps rippled through the room. Nathan's lawyer sputtered, objecting, but the judge motioned for Angela to continue. One by one, she laid the documents on the table. Bank statements, shell companies, offshore transfers, her voice cutting through the air with precision. "This is not speculation. This is fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. And this," she said, sliding forward a sealed affidavit from the FBI, "is corroboration by federal investigators who have opened an inquiry into the Mitchell family." Nathan's face drained of color. Patricia leaned forward, whispering furiously to their attorney. Veronica tried to sneer, but her hand trembled as she reached for a glass of water. I sat rigid, every muscle taut, watching as the fortress they had built began to crumble stone by stone. Angela's final strike came in the form of my mother's letter, authenticated by handwriting experts paired with testimony from a retired state trooper who had been first on the scene of my father's accident. He testified that evidence of tampering with the vehicle had been buried under orders from higher authorities later linked to Mitchell influence. The judge's gavel struck for silence as murmurs filled the gallery. My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard him over the rush in my ears. Then came the moment I had feared and longed for my own testimony. I stood, hands trembling, and told the story from the beginning, meeting Nathan falling in love, the subtle cruelties from Patricia and Veronica the day I was stripped of my daughter, the night I almost ended everything in my mother's house, and the discovery in the basement that saved me. My voice cracked, but I did not falter. I ended with a single sentence. They did not just take my daughter, they took my father's life, and I will not let them take one more thing. The silence that followed was absolute. Nathan's lawyer tried to recover sputtering objections, dismissing the evidence as circumstantial. But the FBI agents present in the back row rose, confirming that a federal investigation was already underway. The judge leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy with the weight of what he had just heard. When he finally spoke, his words were measured but firm. Given the evidence presented and the corroboration by federal authorities, custody of the minor child, Lily Mitchell is hereby restored to her mother, Clara Mitchell. Furthermore, this court refers all allegations of fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to the federal investigation already in progress. The gavel fell. This time its echo was not a death knell, but a resurrection. I closed my eyes, tears sliding down my cheeks. Across the room, Nathan stared at me with a hatred that could no longer hurt me because I had already won back what mattered most. The air outside the courthouse tasted different when I stepped through its doors, as though the sky itself had cleared after years of suffocating storms. Reporters clustered near the steps, their cameras flashing voices overlapping with questions I barely heard. All I saw was Lily standing just beyond the barricade with a social worker at her side. Her eyes widened when she spotted me, and for a moment, time slowed. I rushed forward, my arms opening, and she ran into me with the force of 1,000 unspoken prayers. I buried my face in her hair, inhaling the familiar scent of lavender shampoo, whispering, "Mommy's here. Mommy's not going anywhere." Tears streamed down both our faces as the world blurred around us. For the first time in months, the hollow ache in my chest began to heal. Angela touched my shoulder lightly, her eyes soft with victory. "It's not over," she murmured, "but it's beginning." She was right. The Mitchell empire collapsed in pieces over the following weeks. Federal indictments rolled out like thunder. Nathan was arrested on charges of fraud, racketeering, and obstruction of justice, his polished image paraded in handcuffs on evening news broadcasts. Patricia Once, the queen of Pasadena society, was indicted for conspiracy and perjury, her sharp tongue silenced by the weight of her own lies. Veronica fled to Nevada but was dragged back in disgrace, charged with aiding and abetting. Their mansion, the one where I had once walked on eggshells under crystal chandeliers, now stood vacant. Its windows shuttered a hollow monument to greed and cruelty. Yet none of their downfall mattered to me as much as the small, everyday miracles of being Lily's mother again. Packing her lunch for school, brushing her hair into braids, tucking her into bed at night as she whispered, "Don't leave me again." Each moment was a stitch mending the fabric of our lives. Some nights I sat on the porch of my mother's old Ohio home, the safe, now empty, but my heart full. I would trace the outline of her photograph, whispering thanks into the quiet, knowing she had saved me long after death. She had given me the truth, and with it, the strength to fight back. One evening, Lily climbed into my lap and asked, "Mommy, are the bad people gone?" I kissed her forehead. "They're paying for what they did, and they can't hurt us anymore." But inside, I knew it was more than punishment. It was proof that truth cannot stay buried forever. Not in courtrooms, not in basements, not even in grief. My father's memory had been restored. My mother's silence given voice. My daughter's laughter returned to me. Out of the ashes of betrayal, I had rebuilt something stronger than the mansion I had lost. I had rebuilt us. As the cicadas hummed in the summer air and Lily drifted to sleep against my chest, I closed my eyes and breathed in peace. The Mitchells had believed they could erase me. Instead, they had created the very force that destroyed them. And in the end, I understood the legacy my parents had left me, not just survival, but courage. If you've stayed with me through this journey, thank you. Stories like mine remind us that even when betrayal cuts the deepest truth and justice can still rise from the ashes. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what part of this story touched you the most. Please share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your words mean more than you know. If you found strength in my fight to reclaim my daughter, my home, and my dignity, let me invite you to join this community. Hit the like button to let the platform know these stories matter. Subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of resilience, betrayal, and redemption. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're the first to see when a new story is released. Together, we can build a place where truth is heard, pain is honored, and victories are celebrated.